There is a certain kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. It is the loneliness of being in a room full of people who have already decided what you are, who speak carefully around you, who move things without telling you, who smile at you with their mouths while their eyes are already looking somewhere else, at someone more useful, more capable, more whole. Prince Lucien Vale knew that loneliness the way he knew everything else, through texture, temperature, and the quality of silence in a room. He had been blind since birth, and for 20 years the kingdom of Valenmere had been trying to decide what to do with him. Tonight, on the road through Veilwood forest, in the back of a royal carriage, with rain beginning to fall and birds going suddenly, completely silent, Lucien was about to find out that someone had finally made a decision. He just didn't know yet that it would change everything. The royal procession had entered Veilwood forest at dusk. 6 guards, 1 carriage, and a road that the captain of the guard had never entirely trusted. Rayna had been Lucien's guard captain for 3 years, efficient, loyal, and rarely wrong about her instincts. Her instincts, at this particular moment, were screaming. The fog had come in too fast, the road had narrowed, and the forest felt different tonight, awake, watchful. Inside the carriage, Lucien sat with his head tilted slightly, the angle that meant he was listening to something no one else had noticed. He had been counting. The birds of Veilwood were legendary, layered and constant. 11 minutes ago, they had gone silent, all at once, like a held breath, like a warning. Then the sky broke open, not the way storms usually built. This came all at once, violent and absolute, as though held back by force and suddenly released. Thunder cracked through the trees. Lightning tore the sky white. The horses screamed. He heard the tree come down before anyone else did, the deep, tearing groan of ancient wood giving way. He heard it fall between the carriage and the guards, heard Rayna shout, heard the horses bolt. The carriage lurched, the door swung open, and then Lucien was falling, hitting mud and cold rain and the hard ground of Veilwood forest, lying still in the dark with Rayna's voice already fading into the storm. He lay completely still for 3 full seconds. Then he pushed himself upright, nothing broken. Good. Rayna was gone, the carriage was gone, the guards were gone, and he was alone, in complete darkness, in the middle of a forest that felt less like weather and more like intention. Lucien Vale straightened his soaked cloak, turned his face into the wind, and began to think. He moved carefully, one hand extended, feeling for trees. He navigated by sound, the direction of wind, the way rain hit different surfaces, the change in echo near something solid. He called for Rayna. Nothing came back but rain. He found a tree trunk and pressed his back against it and breathed. He was good at this, the discipline of not panicking. He had learned it young, in a world designed entirely by and for people who could see it. He had learned to be still when everything told him to run, to listen when everything was noise. A branch cracked to his left, sharp, deliberate, the specific sound of weight shifting, not wind, not an animal, something that knew how to move quietly, but had for just a moment forgotten to. Lucien turned his head toward the sound and went completely still, then spoke. "I know you're there. I can hear you breathing." He had been watching for 4 minutes, long enough to understand that this was not someone who had simply been separated from their party. This was someone who experienced the world differently, and who was doing it under these circumstances with a composure that Kael found quietly remarkable. He lowered his bow and stepped forward. What happened next happened fast, a step toward Lucien to make himself heard. Lucien, startled, stepped back. He didn't know about the ravine. His foot found air. A hand seized Lucien's arm and hauled him back hard. They staggered together at the edge of something that could have ended everything. The hunter's grip shifted, not releasing, but recalibrating, becoming something more careful, something that understood what it was holding on to. Lucien felt the change immediately. He felt everything immediately. Every shift in pressure registered with a precision that sighted people rarely needed to develop. The grip had changed from someone holding a stranger back from danger to something that knew it was holding something worth being careful with. He had been held carefully before, his entire life, carefully and from a distance, with the tenderness reserved for fragile things. This was different. This was careful the way you were careful with something strong, something capable. Lucien had never felt that particular distinction before. "Lead the way," he said. "I'll follow your steps." He walked slower. Kael told himself it was the terrain. He maintained that position for approximately 30 seconds before he stopped bothering. He walked slower because the prince was behind him. He shifted closer, close enough that his arm brushed Lucien's as they moved, giving him something to orient by, without either of them having to acknowledge what it was. Something wound tight in Lucien's chest, loosened a single degree. "You're not very good at being thanked," Lucien said. "Not much practice," said the hunter. And they walked on through the dark, and the rain fell, and Veilwood forest closed around them like a secret being kept. The cabin was hidden between two ancient oaks, half consumed by moss, invisible until you were standing in front of it. From the outside, it looked abandoned. From the inside, the moment Kael got the fire going and the first warm light pushed back the dark, it felt like something else entirely, like a held breath, like a space that had been waiting. Lucien stood near the door and listened to the room before he moved into it. He always did this, took the measure of a new space before his body committed to it. The fire was to his left, close. The walls were near, small room, maybe 4 strides across. 2 windows, both shuttered. 1 door behind him. He moved toward the fire, not because he needed to be told, but because the warmth was there, and he was cold in the way that went past physical, the way that happened when too many things went wrong in too short a time. They talked. Or rather, they said the minimum necessary things and left the rest in the silence between them, where it was safer. The cabin had belonged to him once, the hunter said. Not anymore. 2 words carrying a weight he hadn't meant to put there. Lucien turned those words over in his mind the way his fingers turned over unfamiliar objects, looking for the shape of what was underneath. Not, "I moved on." Not, "I outgrew it." Just, "not anymore." The door closed. The subject finished. He filed it carefully alongside everything else he was learning about the man across the fire. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the fire burned. And Lucien, for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, felt something close to safe. Kael didn't sleep. He sat by the fire and told himself he was keeping watch. There were real threats in this forest. The wrong-coloured scouts, the black-fletched arrow half buried in the mud outside, the specific wrongness of a storm that had arrived too fast and too clean. Keeping watch was entirely justified. He watched the fire. He watched the prince. By morning, the rain had softened to a low, persistent drizzle. Lucien woke the way Kael had already noticed he did everything, quietly, without drama, lying still first, and listening before he moved, taking the measure of the world through sound before he trusted his body to it. Then he stood and began to move along the edge of the cabin, one hand trailing the wall, steps measured and precise, his lips moving slightly as he counted. Kael watched him map the room and felt something shift in his chest that he had no immediate category for. It wasn't pity. He had seen pity his whole life. It had a specific texture, heavy, slightly ashamed of itself, always accompanied by the need to look away. This was the opposite of looking away. This was the particular arrested attention of someone watching something extraordinary happen quietly. He moved a stool out of Lucien's path without saying anything, didn't announce it, didn't make it a moment, just moved it. Lucien heard the scrape of wood on the floor. He stopped walking, and for a moment his face did something he didn't know it was doing, something that opened, something that had been held carefully closed for a very long time and had, without permission, decided to rest. Then it was gone. "Thank you," Lucien said. "Don't mention it," Kael said, and both of them understood they were talking about something larger than a stool. He had been carrying the arrow since the night before. Black fletching, custom weight, the specific craftsmanship of something made to order. He had known immediately what it meant. He set it on the floor between them. Lucien's hand found it immediately, reaching out with that quiet precision that never failed to strike Kael somewhere unguarded, and traced it carefully. The shaft, the fletching, the broken tip. His face changed, not dramatically, just a subtle sharpening. The way difficulty made him more precise rather than less. "Someone shot this during the storm," Lucien said, "when it would look like an accident." "Yes," Kael said. "Storms don't break that fast or that clean. Whoever sent that arrow knew exactly where the carriage was. Someone planned this, someone who knew the route, someone who wanted Lucien separated from his guards, alone, in the dark, in the most dangerous forest in the kingdom." "Then going back might not be safe," Lucien said. "Not yet," Kael said. And in the silence that followed, in the careful, weighted quiet of 2 people sitting with a truth too large for the room, something shifted between them, not toward each other, not yet, but away from the careful distance they had been maintaining, towards something that had no name yet, but that both of them could feel. They went out in the afternoon, Kael to check the perimeter, Lucien because he refused to be left behind. Kael had expected an argument about it. He had prepared, very briefly, to explain the practical reasons why leaving the prince alone in an unfamiliar cabin while unknown scouts circled the forest was the safer option. Lucien had simply stood up and said, I'm coming. And something in the particular quality of those two words, not a request, not a challenge, just a calm statement of what was going to happen, had made Kael decide the argument wasn't worth having. He was not entirely sure when he had started making decisions based on what Lucien's voice sounded like. He filed that away for later examination. They moved through the forest edge together, Kael slightly ahead, Lucien close behind, navigating by the sound of footsteps and the occasional low-voiced direction Kael had started giving, without being asked. Step up, low route, ground drops here. He watched Lucien absorb each piece of information cleanly, without hesitation, without the overcaution of someone who didn't trust their own body. He moved like someone who had made peace with the world requiring more of him, and had simply decided to be enough for it. Then Kael stopped. His hand went back, finding Lucien's arm, stopping him. Two sets of footsteps in the trees to the northeast, moving when they moved, stopping when they stopped. They had been followed. The scout emerged from the fog, wrong insignia, wrong colours, not royal guard, and in the second before everything broke into running, Kael registered one clean, certain thought. This was someone who had been looking for Lucien specifically. He grabbed Lucien's wrist and Lucien ran with him. No hesitation, no resistance, matching Kael's pace entirely by the pull of his grip and the rhythm of his footsteps. Every direction Kael gave, duck, step up, left, absorbed immediately, executed perfectly. They moved through the dark forest like a single thing, like two people who had been doing this together for years. Kael pulled them into a hollow between two massive roots, pressing back into shadow, into silence. Footsteps passed close, very close. Neither of them breathed. In the dark, Lucien's hand was under Kael's, pressed against the bark, covered, held still. Kael had done it without thinking. A reflex. Stay still. That was all it was. The footsteps faded, disappeared, and still neither of them moved. The darkness between them was very small. It had been getting smaller for a while now. Kael was aware of this the way you were aware of a fire getting hotter, gradually and then all at once, and then with the specific clarity of something you could no longer pretend not to notice. Back in the cabin. The danger had passed. The fire was rebuilt. And in the quiet aftermath of adrenaline, Kael noticed the cut, just below Lucien's cheekbone. Shallow. He had not mentioned it. Of course he hadn't. Kael found a cloth and knelt close and began to clean it without announcing himself first. He moved carefully enough that the first thing Lucien felt was gentle pressure, not surprise. The specific care of hands that understood what they were touching, and Lucien went still. Not the tense stillness of someone startled. The other kind, the kind that meant, this is more than all right. This is something I did not know I needed, and am only now, in the having of it, understanding the shape of the absence. Kael worked slowly, more slowly than necessary. His hands, which knew how to string a bow in the dark, how to build a fire from nothing in a rainstorm, moved across Lucien's face with a care that had nothing to do with the practical task and everything to do with the person beneath it. He tilted Lucien's jaw slightly to see the cut better. He told himself that was why. Lucien turned his face upward, not toward the pressure exactly, but toward Kael, as if he already knew, with the precise internal compass he had been developing for 20 years, exactly where Kael was in the room. He had become part of its geography. That thought landed in Kael's chest like something thrown. He finished cleaning the cut. He did not immediately move away. They sat very close in the firelight, close enough that Kael could see the way the flames moved in Lucien's eyes, that particular quality of light reflected in a gaze that did not follow it. Beautiful, he thought, and then immediately did not think it, and then thought it again anyway, because some thoughts refused to be managed. It was Lucien who asked, quietly, carefully, the way he did everything, with a precision that left room for refusal, that made the asking itself a kind of courtesy. Can I? 2 words, hands raised slightly, a question in the gesture that needed no further explanation. Kael had gone very still. He was not, generally speaking, a person who let people close. He had spent years perfecting the particular art of being present without being accessible, of existing in a room without being available to it. It was a skill he had developed long before the forest, long before the exile, long before all the careful distance he had placed between himself and every person who might have mattered. He said nothing, which was, he realized, a kind of answer. Lucien's fingertips touched his jaw, and Kael, who had not been touched gently, not truly gently, not in a way that meant something, in longer than he could clearly remember, stopped breathing correctly. The hands moved slowly, reading him. That was the only word for it, reading, the way Lucien read every room he entered, every object placed in his hands, every piece of the world he was not permitted to simply look at, learning the shape of something through patient, careful attention. He was learning the shape of Kael. "Strong jaw," Lucien said. "You're frowning." "I'm not frowning," Kael said. "Your brow is," Lucien said, "right here." And his thumb brushed across Kael's brow, so lightly it barely happened, and something locked inside Kael's chest shifted. Not broke, not dissolved, just moved. Like something that had been braced against a door, holding it closed for a very long time, had simply, for one unguarded moment, stopped pushing. Lucien's hand stilled against his jaw. "What do you see?" Kael asked. "Someone," Lucien said quietly, "who is trying very hard not to feel something." Kael caught Lucien's hand, not pulling it away, just holding it still against his jaw, as if letting go would mean admitting, to himself, to the night, to the specific and terrifying intimacy of this small cabin, that he wanted it to stay. The fire was nearly gone. The whole world had reduced itself to this, warm light, rain, and the space between two people that had been shrinking, incrementally, inevitably, since the moment a stranger's voice had emerged from the dark and said, "I know you're there. I can hear you breathing." Kael's forehead dropped, almost touching Lucien's. Almost. He was a person who had learned to live in the space of almost, who had learned to want things from a careful distance where the wanting couldn't cost him anything. He had been sent away from everything he had once belonged to, not because he had done anything wrong, but because the kingdom had found him inconvenient, had decided he was a problem easier solved by removal than resolution. He had stopped letting things matter after that. It was simpler. And then a blind prince had fallen out of a storm and into his forest and had followed his footsteps through the dark and had touched his face like it was worth memorizing. And simple had become a very complicated thing to maintain. "You're a prince," he said, "and I'm someone your kingdom threw away." Lucien's answer came without hesitation. "You're someone who rebuilt a fire because I was cold, who covered my hand in the dark, who touched my face like I wasn't broken. That's all I know about you. And somehow it's already more than I know about anyone else." Kael had no answer for that. His hand came up, slowly, and cupped Lucien's face with a gentleness that did not match, would never have matched, the roughness of the hands that held it. Lucien turned into it, the way a person turned toward warmth without deciding to. Their foreheads touched, the world held its breath. And then a horn, distant, then less distant, the unmistakable call of a royal search party moving through Veilwood forest, getting closer with every breath. Kael pulled back. His voice, when it came, was flat again, the careful flatness of someone rebuilding walls at speed. "They're close. We need to move." Lucien sat still for just a moment, processing the particular cruelty of almost. Then he nodded and stood and reached for Kael's arm, not for guidance, not to follow, just to hold on, just for one more second, before the world came back in. Kael looked down at the hand on his arm and did not pull away. Outside, the horns called through the trees. Inside, the fire went out. And in the darkness after, both of them understood that something had happened in this cabin that could not be undone. The only question was what they were going to do with it. That answer was coming. But not tonight. This is where I would tell you they walked out and back into their separate lives, and that was the end of it. But I would be lying, because the arrow was still out there. The wrong insignia on those scouts, the question of who had planned a storm and why. And there was Kael Draven's past, the part he hadn't told Lucien, the part that connected him, directly and catastrophically, to the crown Lucien wore. Everything was coming, and when it arrived, it would be just as fast, and just as violent, and just as impossible to take back. But that is a story for the next time. Veilwood, Crown of Shadow.